Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's Valerie Ling here, clinical psychologist. Welcome to my page. This is my second live stream this since deciding that I'd like to actually talk a bit more about burnout, given that it is my area of interest. I'm just going to hang on here and see if catch anybody watching live with me today. The topic, of course, today is I'm actually going to talk about what is burnout. It's a little bit, a little bit more of that definition, a little bit of education, and then maybe just my little twist on how I work in burnout. Just going to, apparently I'm discovering that if I do the live on my mobile phone, somehow I don't get to see the likes and the comments. So I'm now doing this thing where I am multitasking and I'm actually going to the laptop and refreshing to see if I catch any comments as we go along. So if you've followed me on the practice page, Center for Effective Living, I am the person who started and now owns the practice, the Center for Effective Living, and here is my personal page. Okay, well, why don't we get started? Then if anybody happens to join me, it is 10 o'clock, so there's a lot of stuff going on in the morning usually. So let's talk about burnout. I'm actually noticing that burnout is coming, the word or the phrase, the sort of the concept is becoming quite apparent in articles, in social media feed. So today I just want to talk to you about what typically is understood as burnout. So burnout is a situation or a condition that was probably coined, as I understand it, in the 1970s. And it had to do with an observation that those in the helping profession, so people who worked professionally to help and care for others, were actually experiencing severe and extensive levels of stress. And that severe and extensive levels of stress was actually starting to undermine not only their work performance, but their identity, their self-identity, and their energy levels. So burnout essentially, as was understood from the 1970s, is, I suppose, a kind of extreme work fatigue and stress. Now, the Maslow burnout inventory probably came to be the more popular and the more recognized way of actually measuring burnout. And it has three components, or the idea is that burnout has got three elements, three clusters of symptoms or areas of symptoms that if you're experiencing those things in those three areas, you probably are experiencing burnout. So what are those three areas? Well, first of all, extreme physical and emotional exhaustion. So the point where you're actually getting out of bed or struggling to get out of bed to actually do the things that you need to perform at work. So physical and emotional exhaustion. The second is a degree of cynicism and a kind of a detachment, like what's the point anyway? Not actually wanting to interact with people, especially the people that you're helping, and starting to actually feel like you want to actually withdraw from the work. And the third area is an impacted sense of accomplishment and a sense of achievement. So really not feeling like you're actually making that difference that you want to make, that you're actually not achieving or accomplishing the things that you feel are meaningful to accomplish. So those three areas typically, when measured and if significantly impacted, start to suggest that, okay, someone is experiencing burnout. If that's something that you've come across, please do send me a like or shout me a comment, because in the professional literature, burnout's probably something that is defined and then gets redefined. And is it only in the helping professionals? What about in everyday life, people who care for others? mothers, people who are juggling lots of roles in their world and in their life. Now, the important thing about burnout, and probably the reason why I'm quite passionate about it as a clinical psychologist, there's lots of overlap with depression. So, diagnostically speaking, burnout does share quite a lot of similarities with depression, particularly because it impacts a sense of self worth, it impacts your sleep, it impacts your mood. It gives you really a sense of impacted memory and concentration. And so sometimes there's this kind of a toss up of, am I burnt out? Am I actually getting depressed? And people that I generally work with are really quite concerned about that. So I would suggest that in any case, when you're feeling these things, it is probably best to speak to a health professional. Start with a doctor, probably then take it from there to see if what you're experiencing is the product of a work impacted situation in which burnout starts. In other words, the thing that you're working in starts to impact those three areas. But if held in that prolonged stress state, can spill out and start to impact your other identities and your other roles, whether it's your personal life, and it feels like even though you're out of work, the mood just isn't lifting. All right, so that's some of the technical stuff in terms of the definition of burnout. What I would like to now talk about is what brings about this state of burnout. Well, here's a little illustration that I have for you. If you have a car, right, and by and large, it's a good sturdy car, right? It's got all its mechanical bits and pieces working, and all the parts are there, and it's got a purpose, it's got a function. It's meant to get someone from point A to point B, right? And you've got a petrol tank. And as long as the mechanical bits or all the components of the car is working and it's being maintained and taken care of, and you pump in the fuel into the tank, that car is going to go chugga 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 chugga. Now, if you clock up a certain number of kilometers, right, you start to get some wear and tear, and the more kilometers it clocks up, you get more wear and tear, and the more maintenance is required. I guess for me, that's what burnout is about. Right. And I suppose the myth that perpetuates burnout for some of us who help and care for others is we actually forget to turn the lens to ourselves and look at really the two components that are going to help us go the distance, the mechanical and the physical components, as well as the tank. What's in the tank that's resourcing us to go to do the work that we're doing? So in the helping professions with burnout, it's all about assessment and alignment. We've actually got to figure out how aligned we are. So let's start with some of the causes that might cause misalignment. If you think about my illustration with the car, but just remember that as a helping professional or as someone who's caring for others, your little car is you, basically you. What's in here, and what's going on, in your body is what is delivering that care. And so turning the lens to actually do an audit and have a look and see how we're aligned or misaligned is really important. Okay, so what are some of the causes? What are some of the things that can be a real drain on the fuel tank as well as a real wear and tear on the person? Well, first of all, lack of clarity, lack of role clarity. Oops, someone's calling me. Let me just decline that. So a lack of role clarity where you're actually not quite sure what you're supposed to do. You might have unclear expectations. You might have unclear tasks. You might have, maybe you're transitioning into a new sort of a role, or maybe your role has blown out. For some of us who are psychologists, when we're actually owning a business, we're no longer just sitting in the role of helping our clients, but we're starting to need to juggle quite a few of the other roles that comes together with the business, for example. So definitely a lack of role clarity does impact the wear and tear. Related to that is unclear expectations. We're not actually sure what performing means. We're not actually sure whether we are supposed to be doing this or doing that. And more than likely in the helping professionals, we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves because we place such a high value on looking externally to actually figure out how we can help and problem solve for someone else. we actually amplify our expectations of ourselves to be able to deliver that. Let me say that again. We amplify the expectations that we have on ourselves to deliver that. Why? Because we haven't looked more broadly into what are all the other systems, what are all the other elements and dynamics that require us as an individual to deliver that care. So let me talk about some of those systems for a little bit. If you heard my Fire in the Belly live video I did a couple of days ago, I actually hinted at it, or I talked about it. You see, when we're helping and caring for someone, it's not just what we're saying or thinking that fuels that. There's lots of other things, right? There's all kinds of other mechanics and tanks that need to be tanked up. First of all, there's your intellectual capital, right? So there's actually what you're feeding your mind, what skills that you're growing, your own personal growth. And if you're only giving, and doing, and not replenishing that, you're actually going to start to feel and start to have self messages thinking, I can't do this. I'm not competent. I don't have the latest techniques. I'm not up to date. And the more that's happening, you're going to start feeling a kind of a self-doubt. So the first thing to think about is your intellectual capital. How are you growing that? Where are you at the moment? Have you done some visioning for that? Have you set yourself some learning and growth goals for your intellectual capital? And what's refilling that, right? So capital is there. It gets used, right? It gets depleted. And then you need to fill it up. You need to be resourced. Then you need to look at things like your emotional capital, your emotional resources. What's going on in your other parts of your life? It's not just you close the door and you helping someone and the whole world blanks out. No, there's going to be your own personal emotional. Where are your vulnerabilities? Things that's going on in your family, priorities and seasons of life at the moment. It could be a time where you've got young children, or maybe you've got aging parents, right? So your own emotional resources, and actually tapping into that and saying, well, where else are my emotional resources going? And how replenished am I in those other areas? Is it a case that I actually need to put some boundaries on the type of work that I'm doing so that I have enough resources to give to that area, right? So emotional resources. Then we look at social resources, right? And that's to do with the degree to which our relationships are actually providing us with input. We need professional support relationships, the degree that you're meeting up with your own mentor, with your own coach, with your own debriefs. Do you have someone to pick up and call? Have you named that person when professionally you're having an issue and you really need that support? Is there that person on the other line? Are you actually filling up those tanks weekly, monthly? Are there yearly plans in place for you to continue to connect with the people professionally who provide you with support, but also personally? When was the last time you had fun? When was the last time you experienced yourself, not just in that serious giving mode, but also in that fun mode, right? The all of you mode. How about the relationships where you're actually feeling warm, tenderness, and affection? Are those tanked up? So your social support networks are really important to assess and evaluate. Then comes your occupational wellness. I'm going to take a sip now. And typically, I guess that's where burnout tends to look at, is in terms of resourcing. It's that work, burn, and drain. So work resources. Now, you can talk at length about that. That's lots of things that goes into work resources. One simple thing is just your environment. How is your environment set up to actually bring about interaction with others? Is it ergonomically set up? Is it set up to be in sync with the way that you work, right? So there's the physical environment. Then there's the collegial elements in the work environment. How are you interacting as a team? Is there high conflict? Do you actually have a way to resource one another? Is that clearly spelt out? And then there's the authority structure. Who are you reporting to? Do you know who you're reporting to? Do you know where to go if you actually need a technical solution, or where you need to report something to someone? What happens in a crisis? Do you know what to do? Do you feel that you've been supported and coached and given feedback? So those are some of the organizational elements that go into it, complete with things like administrative support. Do you have what you require? So at the end of the day, work resources is that idea of there are demands that are coming in from your work, the extent to which you have the resources to meet those demands. So there's a few other areas. I kind of just stuck a blank there. There's about 5 or 6 other areas, and that's probably a video in itself. But you can see that unless you open up the scope to look at those resources, it's actually really easy to just blame ourselves and say, oh my goodness, it's just me. I'm just not good enough. Or usually there are 2 kind of scripts that I find that come up hand in hand in burnout. It's the high achieving, perfectionistic, unrelenting standards sort of script that comes in, which says that I've got to do more, I haven't done enough, I feel so guilty. That's why I'm feeling this way, and this is why probably I'm lousy at what I do. And the other is really that need to please, that sort of feeling like I've got to, that person has to like me, or I've got to do more because I'm not connecting with them, or my team or my boss, we're not connecting, I'm feeling like I actually really just need to keep doing and keep going to please. And if you're a business owner, that extends to things like your landlord, your accountant, your legal team. Right. So those 2 scripts. Now, you can sort of dig in and figure out where that comes from. I had a supervisor who had a fascinating piece of research, and she actually looked at the families that we came from, and helping professionals in terms of their expectations for themselves. I'm not going to go there today. Right, so that's just a couple of causes of misalignment. But essentially what happens is the person starts to then be misaligned with their role and their fit. And more insidiously, it's not just the physical body, that self-care stuff that then gets impacted. What also gets impacted is a sense of my values are not being expressed. Culture is a real issue here. I'm no longer sure, my hands are going down. I'm no longer sure if I'm actually cut out for this work. I'm not surviving. I'm drowning. Things are going down and going down and going down and going down. And once it goes to that level, I'm not surviving, I'm not drowning, I'm not good enough, that's really hard for someone who helps and cares others, because fundamentally, we are the little car. It's us. And when our sense of self-worth and accomplishment and competency and confidence and our values are really impacted in the work that we're doing, burnout becomes a real issue. Okay, so that's why I talk about it's not just about bubble baths and candles. It's really an assessment, regular assessment of alignment in all your capital, reserves and resources, as well as the sense of your core alignment with the values and the meaning, and that you feel engaged and resourced to do what you need to do. Now that's really technical. Bear in mind that I do give lots of talks, and they're usually 90 minutes to actually unpack some of this, but very happy for you to put your comments or your questions, and even if you're watching in the replay, I will most certainly come back to it. Thanks for watching. Bye.